Welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, heroes and villains. I'm your host, Deshaun Fauntleroy. I know your time is precious, so we're going to get right into today's show. If you haven't listened to episode 41, please go back and do it. The 3 biggest problems that parents face with their student athletes, and pay particular attention to number 3, the rise in mental health disorders. In today's show, the big idea is Nell Daly. Now, I'm going to warn you, this isn't a massive play, but it is a deep one. Show notes, links, conversation, and more at sportsmastery.com/52. Now, with this being a massive play, I'm going to front load it before we even get into the episode. Today, we're going to be discussing growing up female today, birth control and the female athlete, anti-depressants, male and female energies, and the superwomen of the world. Nell Daly is a highly trained, pioneering, holistic psychotherapist, journalist, TV commentator, and mother of 3. Her single most important mission is teaching people cutting-edge mental health protocols and improving patient care by revamping traditional, conventional treatments, which include openly questioning the use of many psychiatric medications on people who are depressed or anxious. Nell is the host of Unscripted, a Point Zero Studios production where she engages in conversations, sometimes hilarious, sometimes serious, with some of the biggest thought leaders and scientists around the world on all things health related, the study of human consciousness, evidence-based functional medicine, and how psycho-spiritual practices are used to help people live better lives are particular interest to Nell and her listeners. Now, thanks to her dual background in journalism and mental health, Nell has been described as one of the most relatable, well-informed, and innovative women in mental health by producers at Fox News. Nell's real-world girl next door advice has won her a stellar reputation in the business for bringing a unique mix of thoughtful, well-researched, and provocative insights to a wide range of topics. Her work has been featured in major publications such as Elle, Self, Parents in Time Out, New York. She has also written for the Huffington Post, The Imperfect Parent, and you can catch her regularly on national television outlets like CNN, Fox, CNBC, and HLN. Nell reaches through television, radio, print, and podcasts between 9 and 19 million people a month. I'm telling you, everybody, if you're listening to this, this is a must listen. So without further ado, I want to bring on to the show Nell Daly. Nell, what are you up to these days?
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. That was such an amazing introduction. I mean, can you do all my introductions? That was awesome. Oh my gosh. I was like, who's that girl he's talking about? I'm good. I'm good today. I'm sitting here in New York City, in my office on Fifth Ave and living the dream. Living the dream.
That's awesome. I first heard you on the I'm Not You podcast by Nee Shabomahim. I know Nee, I've interviewed on this show. I consider him a good friend. And I thought with your background, you would be a perfect guest for the Sports Mastery show. I wanted to ask you, Nell, tell us about your education and formal schooling background.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I went to Trinity College, which is in Connecticut. It's a small NASCAC school where I actually was an athlete. I was a swimmer there, and I also rowed my freshman year. And then I played some water polo in college also. So I went to Trinity, and I majored in English. And afterwards, I ended up doing an MFA in creative writing and nonfiction creative writing and journalism from Columbia University. After that, I eventually got hired as a professor to teach in the School of Education at NYU. And when I was there, I was still quite young. When I was there, I decided to do another master's degree. So I did an MSW in social work, and then I did advanced psychoanalytic training at Washington Square Institute in New York City. And then I did postgraduate work at places like Cornell, and I've attended Harvard. I've, pretty much anything academic I like to fall into. So I've done a lot of postgraduate training at different, places. And yeah, that's it. I opened up a private practice by the time I was 30 on Fifth Avenue. And I've been doing this work for about 10 years now.
That's awesome. Now considering your like collegiate travels from Trinity College on to New York University and then later being at Harvard, what made you keep going with education? Is this where you saw yourself as being like a psychotherapist and then being able to get out into the field and do public speaking engagements and things of that sort?
I think that it's not until you have some time that you've like accomplished some things in your life that you look back and you go, oh my God, there was like an overarching plan to it all. And I'm super spiritual, so I believe in that. But it wasn't necessarily like such a conscious thing when I was doing it. I really loved school. I always loved it. It was always sort of a place where I was able to succeed and felt like I had some control over that success. I tend to be pretty type A. Although I have to work really hard at school. Like it wasn't one of those things that came easily for me. I'm not the type of kid who could take a test and score like outrageously high on some sort of standardized test at all. Like I have to put in the work to almost everything I do. I'm filled with a lot of grit, I would say. And so, I just always wanted to kind of further my education. And it was really important in the family that I grew up in. And I knew it was my way out. And I knew it was my way to be an independent woman in this world, is to get a really good education. And so I studied English literature and then went on to Columbia. And I sort of toyed with the idea of doing like broadcasting, but I was so involved in the writing side of it that it was more like the quieter side of journalism and reporting. And then I lived in the West Village for a while I was raising my young kids. And just by living in the West Village, I was meeting a lot of people and they were saying like, hey, can you do this for me? Can you be on the Tyra show? This was after I became a psychotherapist. And so then all of a sudden I started reporting on mental health quite a bit. By the time I had 3 kids, I sort of had dropped out. And then over the last 4 or 5 years, I really started to feel stuck in my practice as I started to change the way I was treating people, going from treating people conventionally to holistically, wanting to reach a much larger audience, especially because I was realizing that in my field we're completely over-medicating people in our society. And I felt very responsible and somewhat guilty for that. And so all of a sudden you kind of wake up one morning and you feel like you're called to service, and someone's got to be the bridge, and someone has to be trying to disrupt things if they feel in their heart that they should. And so I've just started really pushing hard on getting my voice out there and bringing other voices that are also cutting edge and sort of shaking up the field a bit, or the fields that they're in, and providing a platform for people to get their messaging out. I also really wanted to elevate the conversation, right? I mean, even if we look at American politics today, it's like we all have to work really hard at trying to elevate the conversation to try to get somewhere. And so that was definitely part of the mission.
Awesome. I like it. If you're listening to this, this is a unique presentation. She needs your attention. I need your attention. We're dropping a lot of nuggets today. When you get a chance, go to Sports Mastery on iTunes. This is a 5-star show. You just heard her background. This is 5-star, and we're not even halfway into the show. I appreciate what you said earlier, Nell. If you're a female athlete listening, or if you're someone that works with female athletes, if you're a mom listening, young girls, young ladies, you have to stay in school. You have to further your education. That's going to give you a route to your own independence. It's going to open up doors that you least expected. Just trust in the process. Listen to what Coach Nell is saying. She is delivering some valuable nuggets today. Nell, you talked about being a female athlete as a rower. Mm-hmm. I'm really glad you can come on the show today. I know this might spin into some kind of a different type of rabbit hole, but at Sports Mastery, we talk about things that most people don't like to talk about. We explore some things that sometimes are sugar-coated or glossed over. I really was looking forward to having you come on, and I wanted to get your thoughts on what's it like growing up female today versus like 30 to 35 or 40 years ago.
Oh my gosh, it's so different. Right. I mean, the world is rapidly changing. And, look, I think it's getting better for women. I think that our mothers and sort of, I'm officially a Gen Xer, right? But I was raised by a baby boomer, and I'm officially a Gen Xer, but I'd like to consider myself sort of a millennial. Millennial generation started in the 1980s, and I'm 19. I was born in 1975. I'm 41 now.
Okay.
And I think the baby boomers did a lot for us, for women to change sort of how many opportunities obviously we have. I mean, we see that in the way that we've changed laws around athletics and in terms of, getting women increasingly more opportunities in business fields and in science and in medicine. Hopefully we keep working hard at raising equalizing the pay gap and creating better systems for women who want to have children and stay in the workforce, like childcare and, maternity leaves and family leave policies and stuff like that. So I think it's getting better, but the idea is that we want to give women the same opportunities and freedoms that we afford men in this society. And so I don't know if that answers your question. I think the young female patients that I see in my office now, the millennials, I'm so happy. Like, I think that they're much more evolved and much more open than I was at that age already. Like when I was in college and coming out of college, it was still sort of like taboo to live with your boyfriend after college for many of my cohorts. And we still didn't people were just discovering that they could have babies without men, right? Like you're like, oh, I could, either like get knocked up or do artificial insemination or freeze my eggs. But there was still like a huge cultural taboo around these things. And now, 15 years later, I mean, if I could go back in time, like I would have no problem doing that. I certainly would have no problem if I hadn't had kids now. It's much more socially acceptable for women to do these things, and society is more accepting of it, at least, in kind of on the coasts. I don't know how it is necessarily in the middle parts of the country where it might be a little bit more conservative, but certainly in New York City and LA and, places like Miami, a lot of things have become more socially acceptable for women to do that's increasing our freedoms. And so I think that that's all really positive.
Now I have to add a little bit of shenanigans here, Nell, because I have a friend, he's training an athlete, and I wanted to ask you this. He he explained that eventually I figured it out. How do you explain a kid that has 4 moms?
How do you talk to a kid who has 4 moms?
No, how do you explain how a kid would have 4 moms? How would that happen?
Well, obviously there was a lesbian couple who had a baby and then got divorced, and then they both repartnered.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Yep. Like I've seen this kid have 4 different women come and pick him up. And my friend, I would like, who's that woman? He's like, his mom. I'm like, how many moms does he have? And he finally said 4. And I'm like, well, how the hell do you do that? And he explained it, and it made sense. But, it was more about the joke and figuring it out, because, it is a norm because we have alternative ways of becoming parents and then obviously production and procreation now.
Right. Well, you're out in Portland, right?
Yes.
Yeah, which is pretty progressive little place there, right?
It is.
Yeah. So there's a lot of like really beautiful enclaves where people are, raising their children in alternative, I don't consider it alternative anymore. It feels pretty mainstream to me here in New York City in a lot of ways. Yeah. Yeah. So, and that kid's pretty lucky, right?
Yeah. He's 4 moms.
4 moms. That's a lot of nurturing.
Yeah.
That's a lot of love that kid has. That's a lucky kid.
I know you were an athlete once.
Yeah.
Roaring, I know that is a very competitive sport. Yeah. I know it can involve the ego. I know it can be emotional as far as the team and competing. What's your thoughts on birth control regarding the female high school athlete and the female collegiate athlete?
Oh, gosh. Okay. Such a good question. Well, my major sport was actually swimming. But I was a swimmer my whole life, and I ended up, swimming mostly through college. I stopped after my sophomore year of college and then played water polo over at Trinity College in Dublin for a year. And then I came back my senior year and I decided to just really focus on making sure my grades and my graduate thesis was good so I could get into a good graduate school. I really wanted to graduate with honors, so I knew I had to sort of finally retire my athletic career.
Yes.
Okay, here is how I feel. So, and I did a few shows about this already on my podcast. So what happens is you have whether she's an athlete or not, you have a girl who goes into her doctor's office around the age of like 14, 15, or 16 when she first starts getting her period. I mean, girls get their period even younger than that, but that's when they, you start going to the GYN. And for many, many girls in the United States, they say, okay, well, maybe the girl's having some cramps. Maybe she's having sort of irregular periods. Athletes obviously struggle with this a little bit differently because, sometimes if they have a low body fat or when they're really training hard, they don't get a period. So doctors will give them the birth control pill. And sometimes the girls want this because they're becoming sexually active. And everybody sort of like clouds the issue by just saying, oh, we're just doing this to regulate her period, because nobody's actually talking about, talk about elephants in the room. Maybe she's starting to have sex and doesn't want to get pregnant and doesn't know how to tell her parents, like, I need to go on birth control pill, or I need to figure out some sort of form of contraception. So the birth control pill, and again, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to get into like all the medicine, even though I've interviewed people on Unscripted who are doctors who can talk in depth about what the birth control does to the body. But many of us, I was on the pill for years and years. And, it does affect your physical body. It affects your emotional and mental health. And it really affects your sexual health. It really can kill libido in a big way. And I think it's really sad that this is just sort of protocol. And these women get put on the birth control pill. And then let's say they start having some tough times at school and through college. Maybe they get stressed out. Maybe their academics aren't going so well for them. Maybe socially they're struggling, and they go to see a therapist. So now we have 1 out of every 3 women during her childbearing years on psychiatric medication in this country. So they go to see a therapist because they're not feeling well. They're already on the birth control pill. And then they get prescribed generally an SSRI or some sort of psychiatric medication to, quote unquote, like calm their symptoms. This really is the double whammy. Not only do these drugs have side effects, like, again, killing your libido, they flatline you. So when I see patients in here, when they are on an SSRI, for example, and the birth control pill, they have no inner compass. They can't, they're not really feeling all of their emotional capacity. It's sort of, in another way to describe it, it sort of deadens the spirit. So if you think about your emotional range, like I always use this metaphor as like a grand piano, you're only playing like at middle C. Like a few keys below middle C and a few keys above middle C. You're not playing to your full emotional range. And I really see them shrink their emotional range. And part of like my huge mission is to really speak up about this, because let's just take an athlete, for example. If we do this to a woman, not only do we affect her body, like I know there's a lot of weight gain. I have very hard time meeting girls who get off the pill eventually, and their certain drives come back, their sexual drive. And they also tend to lose a lot of weight. Like it makes you have a lot of like baby fat on you. It makes you puffy. So a lot of girls end up losing 5 or 10 pounds and getting leaner after they get off the birth control pill. And they also just don't have, like, no one's talking to them about other options that they can use for birth control. So if you can just think about it this way in terms of an athlete, like where do you get your fire as an athlete? Like where are your drives coming from? Like, right, you want to feel like some level of nervousness. You want to feel some level of fear. You want to feel like deep motivation inside of you. You want to feel that fire burning. Maybe you really want to also feel your sex drive, because you can sublimate your sex drive into performance and into training, right? We all do that. And so if we're shortening all of this emotional and physical capacity for women, because they're on the birth control pill and they're on a psychiatric medication, I think it's a massive problem.
I agree. I also wanted to ask you, Nell, for the audience out there, what does SSRI mean?
An SSRI is it's one class of psychiatric medications. So underneath it is like Prozac and Zoloft. Those are sort of the most widely ones that are recommended to women. But a major problem in this country has now become opiates and benzos. So obviously we know that benzos and opiates, like any sort of painkiller, has led to a really massive heroin problem in this country. So people, when I first started in private practice, people were given Xanax, right, for like a flight, like 2 pills if they were traveling after 9/11. Now, most of the people I see in my office are taking some sort of Xanax or Klonopin almost every single day.
Yeah, I've even heard of it in some, in some circles as being a party drug.
Oh, so it's called bars. They take what they call bars. Mm-hmm. And so that's what a lot of young kids are doing now. Like, we didn't do this. Like, there was the date rape drug when we were growing up, right? Like, you kind of always worried about that. Now they date rape drug themselves. So if you drink on these medications, and again, it's really important for parents listening to this out there, that if you drink on these medications, you generally black out. And so you can only imagine what kind of risk a young woman is taking when she does this, because unfortunately we don't live in a society that's necessarily safe for young women. And so they black out, and not to mention these drugs are highly, highly addictive.
Yes.
So to get them off, and no doctors warn them, they give them these drugs without any sort of end game. Like, sometimes they're like, oh, just do it for a year and let's see how you feel in a year and just keep checking in. It's like, these drugs are really, the tapering side effects to some of these drugs, I've witnessed really, really massive panic. And then what happens is the person feels like they don't have the mental strength or resilience in their own self to overcome whatever they're facing, which might not even be that sort of big of a thing, but it feels really big because they don't have the drugs to help them get through it.
It's interesting that you mentioned that pill and it being called bars and then drinking with it, because one of the things that I discuss with my athletes, we have the mental toughness training, the mental skills training, but I also talk a lot about real social dynamics and how what you can do socially can either harm you from reaching certain goals or building your legacy, or what you do socially. If you do things right, it can help you get to a certain place. Now, what I always tell my, especially my male athletes, the football players in particular, because I played football, an African-American male athlete, you do get stereotyped. But I tell my kids, you don't find yourself at a party and you look at the woman or the young girl that has 2 drinks in her hand. And like you said, she's popping one of those bars. You have to get out of there, because you don't even want to be in the same room or in the same venue if a crime was committed, because you don't have time to be a part of anything like that in today's society, because it can harm you. It can affect your scholarship. It can affect your education in terms of, having to transfer to that school due to undue attention. So for some kids, I don't condone any type of rape, but when I'm talking to my boys, you don't even want to be at certain parties. Soon as you see it going a certain way, you have to go the other way.
Wow. That is such great advice, right? I've never heard someone say that. Like, preempt it. And like what you're telling people, and Nihi and I talked about this on the podcast I did with him, and I talk about this a lot on Unscripted, is intuition. Like, what you're telling those boys is like, if you start to feel something in the room is going to go bad, get out. And I would even take it a step further and say, like, if you can, pull the girl aside and say, you got to be really careful here. Right? Because if she's at a few beers and she's popping a bar, and then, this gets us into sticky territory, because, like, again, no woman should ever be sexually assaulted ever.
Right.
Right? Like, no one has a right to her, even if like, a girl could walk down the street naked in New York City. No one has a right to rape her.
Certainly.
Right. And so 1 out of every 3 women in this country is sexually assaulted. But again, like, I think it's important to sort of like, the bottom line with all of these podcasts that we're doing, it's all about love. And you just have to keep spreading the love. And if you can encourage these young boys and young girls to just spread the love to each other and say, like, hey, you got to be really careful, that's a good thing. So I love what you said there. It's like, just avoid the situations at all costs if you can. The other thing about, these young student athletes and their social lives, it's so distracting. Right? And you can't blame them, because they need to go through a life phase. They need to it's important for them to have these social experiences and romantic relationships and peer relationships and peer support. But it's a fine line between like doing all of that and not having it be really distracting towards a goal. And I still struggle with that as an adult.
Yes, certainly. I have so much on my plate. I'm always worried about my organization. I have to be organized. If I'm not organized, my day, it kind of spins out of control and nothing really gets done.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we do have to be organized in the sense that if you're organized a certain way in your personal life, it's going to reflect when you go outside of your home and present yourself to the world.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
I heard you mention on either Nee's show, Nell, or one of your podcasts, male and female energies. I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on that concept.
What was curious to you about it? The Adi Shakti. We were talking about the Adi Shakti, and I'll explain what that is. But what did you like about it? Can you tell me?
I wanted to know more on your thoughts of like male-female communication, how there are obvious differences in terms of how we're wired and we need to learn about and respect each other's wiring.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's a lifetime journey, right?
Right.
To like look at our partners if we're in relationships with the opposite sex and not like have all of our emotions come to the surface when they do something that pisses us off because we're like, okay, that's kind of a guy thing or that's kind of a girl thing. And, I get into sort of very nuanced discussions about this sort of stuff with colleagues and patients alike and friends and family because they're like, you can't paint these broad gender strokes. But having done the work as much as I've done and worked so deeply sort of in the psyche and souls of both men and women, they are really built differently. And I don't know, part of it is the way that we come into this world, the way we're wired, but also part of it is the way that society, certain qualities about men and women that this society values and teaches, right? So we teach our men not to necessarily be vulnerable. They shouldn't cry. They should still really be providing for everybody in terms of like financially, showing any kind of vulnerability as a sign of weakness. Wearing your heart on your sleeve isn't considered like something that's very masculine still. And, there's the opposite is true. There's all these sort of things that society impresses upon women. The Adi Shakti that Nihi and I were talking about is the balance. It's a Eastern philosophy, and it's the balance between the masculine and the feminine energy. When people are performing at their highest, it's when you really have your masculine and your feminine energy in balance. So let me give you an example of this. I, as a woman, and I'm not saying all women are like this, and I know you have a question coming up for me about superwomen, so we can kind of delve into that as well. But I'm not saying that I'm a superwoman, but what makes like some women that I've seen, what's like one quality that in all people, but in women that they can do this, that really makes them successful, and I'll get to that in a second. As a woman, one of the things that women bring to the table is our emotionality. And when, again, we go on the birth control pill or we're on antidepressants, we cut down on our emotionality. And that's not always such a good thing, obviously, because our emotionality is really dynamic and it's creative and it's nurturing and it you're sitting at the table with a woman, you feel that kind of energy coming out, and it can be incredibly beneficial to whatever endeavor is going on in the room. And including a conversation, right? It's a different perspective. Masculine energy is the manifesting energy, right? Men are really great at sort of putting their emotions aside and building something, right? They can compartmentalize, I think, generally better than women. And that's sometimes a good thing. And sometimes it's a bad thing because if they can't, right? If they can't like tap back into it when they're at home and their girl is like, I'm totally in love with you. And they're like, it's like you're with a robot. It feels awful and relationships begin to start to fall apart. So what we really want to get people to wake up to is this idea of how do you balance your Adi Shakti? So I have to work harder at kind of, because I am a creative person and because I am really intuitive and emotional at times, I have to work hard in the mornings at saying like, okay, I know all this feeling stuff is going on, but I just have to concentrate and manifest, right? I just have to like tap into my masculine energy. I got to put all that stuff aside. And right now for the next like 3 or 4 hours, I'm just going to focus and manifest. And I'm not going to necessarily work from that emotional place in my brain. Men, how I see this like manifesting more for men is men are, if they're really good at the manifesting part, but not so good at the emotional part, they really want to work on their tapping into those emotions and expressing them more and finding a safe place where they can talk about what they're going through, because I think men really need it. I think they need a place to be able to vent and talk and be vulnerable and be soft. And that adds a lot to their personality, actually, because we want to be dynamic people. But I also think that it's really important for men to work on their intuitive side. So women are naturally, we think, more intuitive. And men, if you meet a really intuitive guy, you're starting to get a guy who's functioning at a higher, I think, level. And anyone can tap into their intuition. So again, how this would play out for an athlete, and Mihi and I talked about this on the podcast. It's like these guys, you see these football players, they just like feel the game. Like they feel the game. They see it in front of them. They're just moving from a place of like real instinct and intuition. Like, I know the ball's going to go that way, or I know I should dodge this way. That's a really beautiful thing to watch when we see a guy who's also tapped into that feminine energy of intuition. And I can see it in a visceral way when I look at really great male athletes. Does that make sense?
It does. I was just reflecting on your statements on men being just tapping into their intuition, and their foresight and insight by recognizing their emotions and being able to express their emotions. Because naturally I'm an introvert, but where I'm at now, and then once working in the gym industry, everything is predicated upon sales. So for you to get paid any commissions or bonuses, you're going to have to talk to get people to swipe their cards and sign up for programs. But I was saying that to say, I meet a lot of people. I talk to a lot of people every day. And then, you have to admit, sometimes people lie to you. Sometimes people BS. And at the end of the day, sometimes I just have to sit and relax and reflect on conversations throughout the day, the tonality, all the nonverbal communication that's going on. What are they doing with their eyes? What are they doing with their head? Are they shifting from side to side? Do they favor one leg? Are they doing something with their fingers? Are they moving their feet? And then I see things better. I get along better with people when I'm really able to tap into myself, because I can see more and understand, the situational dynamics at the present time.
Yeah, what a beautiful thing you said. So you start working from a place of what I would call your higher conscious self, right? So you like take a moment and you sort of observe everything. And I think part of what you're observing there is the energy that the person brings into the room.
Yes.
Right? Like what kind of energy are they? And that's what really, like when you start tapping into your intuition a lot, what you're generally reading is someone's energy. And again, like to sort of bring this down for lay people, it's like, how sometimes you meet someone and they're just like a big light?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like you can, if you tap into in your own intuition, and then you start looking at people's energy, you can see like what kind of light they have around them and what kind of aura they have around them. And should I really get invested in this person, or should I back away? What you said also is very tender there, because that must be a hard position to be a guy and to be an introvert, and then also feel like you can talk about your feelings.
Yes, it is tough. Yeah.
Yeah. I've never really sort of put those two things together as well. Like asking a guy to be more vulnerable who's actually a man and an introvert isn't always easy.
I have my athletes journal. I got into journaling a couple of years ago, and then working with a licensed clinical social worker where I train his son, but I've also been to, men's group meetings, and a lot of things I borrow from the clinical social work side, and I bring those concepts into sports mastery, and in my other company is Pro Force Athletics, the sports performance side. But I tell kids, you just have to do the work. If a question calls for something in your journal, I need you to write that out. And that's one of the phrases in our community is you just have to do the work. And then once you write something out, once you talk about it, you kind of unweigh yourself to go further and be more creative.
Mm-hmm. They did a really beautiful study. I can't quote where I read it, but I was doing some research on journaling and therapy last year when I was writing a book proposal. And I read a study where they had students at a college journal about stressful or traumatic events that had happened in their lives. And they found that those students then got sick like 40% less than the students who didn't journal for the next 6 months. Like the amount of relief that we get from just putting onto paper what we feel, or even speaking it out, if that's not your jam and you go to see a therapist and just unburdening yourself and sort of reframing your experience through language is enormously beneficial. Obviously, that's what my field is built on. The other thing is, because I'm super spiritual, I also believe in writing down your goals. So I've worked with some sports coaches, right? You write down your goals and then you can manifest them. And you're sort of, not only are you putting them into the universe, I remember working with an amazing sports psychologist, actually when I was in high school, and I was training for the New England Championships in high school. I swam for a very fast high school team. And he had us write down the times that we wanted to reach and stick them in our bathing suit as we swam. And I think every single kid in that next meet broke their record.
Wow, that's incredible.
Their personal best, just by, it's like there's something about the mind focusing and really like putting it out there concretely that made kids swim faster. And I've never forgotten that. And so I'm definitely one who has like a huge inspiration board above my desk. And I write down what I want to manifest. And I think that's a huge key to this. Whether you believe in sort of the universe or not, and sort of like putting it out there, I mean, I'm just like, go for it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't, right? At least try.
Most definitely. I keep a whiteboard in my office too. And some of the smallest things I just noticed they happen over time. Like that small scribbled down, it's on the whiteboard. I see it every day and those things manifest. Now, speaking about being spiritual and having energy, it leads me back to power. You know, in a prior episode, we did the psychology of superheroes and elite athletes. I think I might have discussed Wonder Woman, but I wanted to talk about superwomen today in terms of the woman that's a CEO, a founder of a company, a startup, inventors, creators, women that are in the mixed martial arts, boxers, they're footballers. Tell me about some of the superwomen that you work with or inspire you, or women that you've helped become who they are today as far as a superwoman.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I've been so blessed to have really powerful women in my office who've inspired me. I know them, you know, people personally as friends who've done kind of great things, both big and small, right? Some of the greatest superhero women I know aren't necessarily the ones who are getting the most public acknowledgement for their work. You know, female boxers and athletes that I know who are amazing, and, you know, moms who have babies and then become major triathletes and that kind of stuff. Here's the thing. And I did a podcast with a guy. This really, given all the training I've had, I've learned so much from I'm such a curious person. Obviously, you can tell that from my academic background, but from doing the podcast and from listening to other people, one of the reasons I wanted to do the podcast is because I wanted to be able to pick up the phone and sort of like call any big thinker and say like, hey, would you mind talking to me on the phone today? And I have a question, right? And I'm sure that was part of the reason why you are doing this as well, because you want to keep learning. And so it's like, might as well record that conversation because other people can benefit from it. And one of the things that, this is amazing, because I've been doing this work for 10 years. We don't talk about, and this is where I really appreciate podcasts like yours and all the ones on athletics. And the podcast world is still very male dominated in a lot of ways.
It is.
One of the things that they talk about a lot is mindset, like all this mindset theory. And actually in my schooling, we don't talk about mindset. Like I didn't even really know what that meant. Like positive psychology was just sort of coming of age out of schools like Harvard and UPenn and out in California when I was doing my training. So mindset theory is amazing to me. And it really comes from a lot of former athletes or former people in the service in the military. And one of the things that I've learned this year is something that a guy named, do you know who Larry Yatch is?
No, I don't. Tell us about him.
Larry Yatch is a former Navy SEAL, and he has something called, I think his company's called like Navy SEAL Mindset. You can Google it. He'd be a great guy for you to have on your podcast. His name's Larry Yatch, and he was in the Naval Academy, and he became really obsessed with the question of who got through BUDS training. So 1 out of every 300 people die training to become a Navy SEAL. So just even by like signing up for it, you're putting yourself at risk.
Right.
And so he wanted to know, like, why does the fat guy who, you know, doesn't seem that remarkable get through BUDS training, but the guy who graduated #1 from the Naval Academy, you know, can't make it through week 2. And so what he found after doing years of sort of studying this was this ability to self-regulate our emotional, our physical, and our mental selves. And this goes exactly back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the show. And I think this is, and again, in the middle of the show, when we're talking about the balance of the Adi Shakti, it's people who are able to self-regulate the best can really perform. And so they don't get distracted from what they need to get done during the day. And they're working at a really high level. And those are definitely, that's like one thread I see carry through the really successful people I know.
Yeah. And in particular, the women that you know.
Yeah, they're just able to like, look, I'm super impressed by, again, because my sort of lead, although a lot of like, I'll meet a lot of people and I'll be like, I think I have a lot of feminine energy. And people are like, are you kidding? Like, you're a single mom with 3 kids and like doing what you do, you actually have like a massive amount of masculine energy, which is probably true. But I feel like I live like half my day with my heart in my throat. Right? Like I have to work really hard not to be like, I hit a bird on the way to work today. And I must have texted like 5 people about it. And like, I was on the train in tears because I know I killed the bird. And I keep thinking like, could I have slowed down? And I'm like, this is not self-regulating behavior, right? It was an accident, like move beyond it. So I have to work really hard at sort of moving beyond those sorts of things in my life to manifest. The women I know who are super powerful, they're badass in terms of, it doesn't mean though, I'm not suggesting they cut off their emotional selves. They're just able to regulate it. Does that make sense?
It does.
It doesn't mean that you act like quote unquote a man. You're very much in touch with your feminine energy. You're very much in touch with your intuitiveness. You just have this ability to sort of function on a very like calm plane throughout the day on a very steady level. Instead of like working in necessarily short spurts, they're the people I see who can work at like a steady gallop all day long. And whatever's kind of going on in the periphery, they're able to focus and shut that out until that's time to deal with that thing in the appropriate manner. The other thing that all the great people I speak to, men and women, throughout the podcast, in my office, all like the super beings I know, guess what the one thing they all do is?
What's that?
Meditate.
I believe it.
Every single one. It's like a joke. It's like, what's the one thing you do? They're like, I meditate. I meditate. I don't get it. I don't understand how it works. I started doing it about a year ago. I wish I was better. I wish I like never missed a day. I have like a couple days in a row where I'll miss, or I've like actually done it very consistently for a while. And then I pulled back and like immediately I felt like my ability to self-regulate really fell apart, which meant that like things in my life started to feel like they were really falling apart and seem much more chaotic than they probably even were, just because I wasn't putting myself into correct alignment in the morning.
Yes, I don't do it as much, but one thing I am consistent with is with my yoga lately. And I found out if I get busy and I miss my once a week session on Sundays, it really throws off my week.
Yeah, having a psycho-spiritual practice is huge. And I mean, it's the same thing like you know, I think people hear meditation now and they're all like, ugh, my God, like how much more can we hear about meditation? But like as an athlete, you have to be performing at the best level you want to be performing at as a strength and endurance coach, you know you need proper alignment. And part of aligning yourself is aligning your emotional, psychic self. And meditation just calms your down, right? You let go of the conscious mind and you tap into the subconscious. Again, you tap into your intuition. And also in that space, in that quiet space, if you start to meditate quite a bit, you can actually start to visualize what you want out of this life. So I have a lot of people coming into me and, you know, we have so many opportunities now to have so many jobs. I mean, you've been through that cycle as well. A lot of people come in and if you don't have a clear vision of what you want, it's really hard to get to a goal. And so one of the first things I say is like, we've got to meditate. We've got to start meditating because it's in meditation that you'll start to get clarity. But it's only when we cut out the outside noise that we can hear what our souls actually want to experience in this life.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, if you're listening to this, coaches, if you're listening to this, listen to what Nell Daly is saying. Sometimes we just have to slow down physically. Sometimes we have to slow down mentally. Just slow your thoughts down and make an attempt at thinking at nothing, at just going into a bliss. So then you can come back and hear those messages that are coming in for you to do the right thing in terms of reaching your goals and becoming your highest self. Now, Nell, I wanted to switch lanes a little bit.
Sure.
You've often been labeled the girl next door. So like you're right now, you're my home girl next door. I'm coming to knock on your door for the third time this week. And my problem comes from one of four areas. I fear something. It's going to be something about sex, love, and money. So I know I've heard you mention that on one of your prior episodes. So tell me about that. What's your thoughts on that? These simple things that if we solved or built a better relationship around, we could function better, especially when it comes to fear. But when you think about sex, love, and money, our relationship to those things and concepts.
That's such an amazing question. I've actually added one more to that category, which is God. So people come into my office, and after a while, when I started working, to write the TEDx talk that I did, I was like, okay, well, I really wanted to write about what was at the heart of my practice. Like, what causes everyone in the end to come in? Like, what's the deep wound? And the deep wound is lack of intimacy in their lives or lack of connection. Lack of connection makes us incredibly symptomatic. And I also realized at that point that basically everyone talks to me about 5 things, and it can manifest in different ways, but it's fear, sex, love, money, and God. Those are the 5 things that everyone talks about. And at the time of the TED Talk, I just said fear, sex, love, and money. But now I know it's God, because towards the end of treatment, when people get better, they start talking about they're not so focused on the individual. They're more focused on the collective.
Right.
And that brings in kind of existential questions about like, why am I here? And what's my purpose? And how do I want to give back? And so, yeah, I mean, like part of our spiritual warriorship in this life is to figure out how to deal with these 5 things, how we feel about them, like how we're going to negotiate them, what we're going to allow into our lives, how much fear we're going to let rule our lives, how we're going to work with our fears in terms of not letting us hold us back. And then, figuring out the money question and coming to life from a place of abundance and not scarcity, which is hard for a lot of us, especially those of us who grew up in any kind of environments where we were deprived. It's really hard to think that like life is abundant when you just are trying to grab on to like the little piece that you have. And you don't really have faith that there will be like a plethora more coming for you. That I had to work really hard on that one, actually. And love is the big thing. Like love is the center of our universe. And that's our lifelong spiritual journey, is just to figure out how to live in like a place of love. And, that's the thing too. When I say all these things, especially when I talk about love, you have to have the dark and the light, right? Just as much as you have to have the Adi Shakti. I don't believe that people are here just to be happy in this world. I believe, again, that we're here to feel our largest emotional range. I believe we're here to like live out our capacity. As an athlete now, as someone who works out really hard now, when I go on long runs at night, I'm like, I want to see how far I can push this body at 41. Yes. Right? Like I want to see, like, I'm going to like really try to like feel my limits as much as I possibly can. And I want to do the same thing with my emotional life, with my love life, in terms of my career, all of it. Like I want to live really big and expansive. So part of that is living on both spectrums, both in the light and in the dark. So sometimes you have to touch your dark side in order to figure out like where the light is. Because without the dark, we wouldn't be able to see the light. So I don't know if that answers your question at all.
It does. It most definitely does, because when we're on a journey for something, when we're discovering our purpose or we're after our purpose and we understand it now, and also the legacy, you have to go on that journey and not think about the end goal, but just think about the process that you have to go through. And that's going to come with some ups and downs. It's going to come with some successes, some wins, some losses, some failures, but it's about you learning on that journey.
I just want to say one thing there. I was thinking about this. I was walking into Grand Central this morning, and I was thinking about my life and sort of like where it's ended up. And did I expect, like, I kind of, some of the best advice I ever got from the training that I've done was take everything season by season, right? Like just worry about the season in front of you. If you're in recovery program, if you're a recovering addict, you take it day by day. Sometimes you have to take it in life hour by hour, right? I've been in so much pain over certain things and certain losses in my life that, man, I was like just get me through this hour. Just get me through the next hour, right? And then you kind of start working day by day and then week by week. But really, if you're in like kind of a somewhat good place in life, you try to work season by season. So I was thinking about that this morning. I was like, God, are things like, life is like so unexpected. It's filled with so many different twists and turns. And there's one quote, whether you believe in God or not, that I love, which is, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Right? Like, tell him your plans. Like, you'll make God laugh really hard. And, going along with that is something that you just said. I hate to sound cliche, but it's true, man. It's about the journey. Because generally, and we know this from doing, like, many studies have been done about this, most of the time we reach a goal. I don't know if you're like this, and I'm trying to get better about this, but I reach a goal and I like relish it for like an hour. And then I'm like, cool, on to the next thing.
On to the next.
And I want to learn how to like celebrate when I hit milestones a lot better and really like understand my accomplishments and sort of take a moment to pat myself on the back or my team on the back and say like, oh my God, we did this. And I'm trying to get much better at that. But I'm so, again, like I feel like there's two types of people in this world. Like there's creators and there's consumers, and not one is better than the other, right? Necessarily. But I don't really love to consume things, but I love to create. So generally when I create something and it's done, I'm on to creating the next thing. But man, that just says it all there. It's about the journey then. It's not necessarily about the goal, because the minute I hit the goal, I'm on to the next journey.
Yes, sometimes we just have to learn how to slow down and celebrate our creativity.
We do. And also just really appreciate that part of it that isn't, like it's not about whether or not you ever make $1 million or everything turns out exactly the way you want it to turn out. Because sometimes when it's, doesn't part of the journey, it leads you down a much better path. And that's how we evolve. That's how we evolve as humans.
Before we close out, Nell, getting down to the 2-minute warning. I know you've often joked with your female clients about shopping for boys for them online with Tinder. And then you went on to say, like, who would be better to pick out your partner than your therapist? Explain that. I thought it was funny and hilarious when I heard it, so I had to bring it up.
Yeah. I mean, look, like, as much as I'm in New York but I see people from all over the country, and I Skype with people from all over the country. So I have like this wonderful set of data. To be honest with you, I mean, come on. Like, I don't know about your personal life, but it's like, no matter how much we accomplish, eros, right? Our romantic lives generally are like pretty forefront for a lot of us. And I guess when we get married, right? Like, I've been married and divorced. I was married for over 10 years. And so then, but even then, like I like loved my husband so much. And so he was very much at the forefront of my brain during the day, as were my kids. So, people come in my office and they're highly symptomatic, either because they're in a relationship that's difficult or they're single and they really want to be in a relationship again. And they're having trouble, finding a partner. In New York, I think there's a lot more women than there are guys. So women have trouble sort of finding dudes here. Okay. And the guys who tend to gravitate to New York are really motivated career-wise. So they can sort of shelve their romantic life and work really hard. And then sort of I see this pattern where they, in their 30s, sort of wake up and say like, oh God, I need to like find a girlfriend, which doesn't make it easy for girls in their, in New York City. So yeah, I talk a lot about love and relationships and dating and sex. And I definitely have been shown like people's Tinder accounts and Bumble accounts and League accounts. And, they like scroll through the guys and they're like, what do you think of this one? And I don't know, I texted him this and then he texted me that. And then should I give him my number and should I go out with it? So I do a lot of that work in here, and I'm happy to do it because like it's fun, right? And like it's real. It's real. Is. Like that's me. It's like if a patient, quote unquote patient, comes in and that's what's on their mind and that's like driving them crazy, it's like bring it out on the table and like let's look at it and let's talk about whether or not you think he's a good dude and what are my gut instincts about the situation. And so that's how I work. Are you single? Do you need me to look at something? Do you want me to get on your Tinder account for you? I don't know what your deal is.
I am single, but I do better when I'm not on any social accounts. I don't have time for distractions right now.
Why? Because you find it too distracting. Have you done it before?
I have. Yeah.
And it's just a total mess, right?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah. If you want to get anything done, you can't be on the apps. It's like, it's so derailing. I agree.
I like Cal Newport's work, Deep Work, his book, and it's about living in the age of distractions. And I found when I'm not on anything, I'm just focused in living life. I meet good people organically. And I had a chance to reflect in my past relationships, all the good ones, I met them organically through somebody else or a chance encounter. So I've been sticking with that. And I'm a man. I still enjoy the hunt. I'll be honest with you. It's not real online, if you ask me. But I know it does have its purpose.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot of beautiful couples have been brought together through it. But what's sweet about what you just said, you've got faith in the universe, dude.
Yes.
Right? You've got faith that when you're ready to have it called in, you're going to call it in. That's what I'm hearing. Yeah. And I love that. And you're coming from a place of abundance. Like there's 7 billion, I think, people in this world now. So she's out there.
I wanted to ask you one more question, Nell.
Yeah.
Regarding the male student athlete, what advice would you give to the male student athlete in his approach to women and conversation?
Oh, gosh. Like how to overcome fear of talking to a woman? Is that what you mean?
Just anything, talking, using the proper language, dialogue.
I go back to this. I'm raising 2 little boys, one who is definitely a budding athlete and one who I think will be a little athlete, although I don't want to push my agenda on him because he's only 5. But I'm lucky that they have a sister and they have obviously, a mom who's trying to model being somewhat of a badass. And I've really tried to raise my kids, my boy, to talk to any girl as if it was his sister or his mother.
I like that.
As long as you're being raised in a home where there's actually respect for women.
Yes.
Right? Because a lot of, kids are still raised in homes where there's a lot of disrespect going on to women. I'm like, imagine if that girl was your sister. And one of the things that, I would really encourage, what happens a lot, and you can talk about this, I'm sure, in terms of male athletes, when a bunch of male athletes get together, there tend to be this hyper masculine posturing. And one of the things my son's already found on his lacrosse teams, and I'm totally outing him and stuff, and just in school in general, is that the kids are already at age 12 and 13 talking really disparagingly about girls behind their backs.
Yes.
And it makes his stomach turn. He's they constantly are ripping girls apart in terms of what their bodies look like, or, who's cool, who's skinny, who's getting boobs, I'm sure it's going to get to a place of what girls put out. Just that kind of hockey room locker talk.
Yes.
And
just locker room talk.
Locker room talk. And look, it's been condoned, whether no matter what, I'm very independent politically, but it's on some level it's been condoned now with the way that the election went, because obviously Trump was caught speaking disparagingly about women and became president despite that, and said, it's come on, guys, this is just locker room talk, right? # locker room talk.
Yes.
But it's damaging for everybody involved, right? It's not just damaging to the girls. No guy, I think, really, when he sits down and looks at himself in the mirror, feels good when he's ripped, whether it's a girl or a boy, to shreds behind their back, or engaged in that kind of behavior. And as we just said earlier on the podcast, some of those beliefs then, under the influence of alcohol or drugs, can actually lead to behaviors that can be incredibly damaging and follow you around for the rest of your life. So I would just really encourage male athletes to come from a place of I'm going to always think about people as being equal, and not engage in even the energy of that kind of communicating. And that can be really hard because there's a lot of social pressure for boys to step away in situations like that. But I love what you said. And this is why men who are really incredible, good men being mentors, even through podcasts, are so wonderful for boys, because you're just putting it out there hey, you know what? You have permission to just keep your mouth shut and say, or to speak up, but you also have your permission just to exit the room. And that's what I tell my son. I'm if you don't feel comfortable calling all your friends out, he can be kind of confrontational that way. And he does it usually generally in a manner where he singles out people, not in front of the group, because he doesn't want to shame anybody. But sometimes he does. Sometimes he calls people right out in front of a large group of people. He's being raised by a social worker. but he and an artist. So, you know, he's and a woman who's like definitely on television sort of saying how she feels politically. So he's not so scared to do it, but he also knows that he can, you know, he has permission to absolutely leave the room.
One more thing, where can the people find you at online, you know, and any products and goods and services that you offer?
Oh, you're so sweet. Okay. So Unscripted is the podcast. It's Unscripted with Nell Daly. And you can just find all the episodes on the kind of the regulars like Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play. You can go to The Daly, which is THEDALY.com. And you can see more about me and what we've got going on over at Point Zero Productions. You can see all the podcasts that we're doing.
My role is to help student athletes develop the mental skills for success in sports, which carry over to their life as well. I work with normal people who are under additional perceived pressures to perform in their sport. My goals are to teach student athletes how to be more confident, focus better, stay composed under pressure, practice more efficiently, and develop more effective pre-game routines. I become an extension of the athlete's support team. Unlike a psychotherapist or psychologist, I do not use couches, prescribe medicines, or work with abnormal behavior. The main difference between my sports mastery program and a psychotherapist is that I work with athletes on sports performance enhancement. I tend not to get into personal challenges such as divorce, breakups, grief counseling, or abnormal behavior. Although those areas of life do affect sports performance, when need be, they are addressed. My philosophy is that you cannot separate the mental from the physical when it comes to performance. After all, decisions, thoughts, images, and feelings drive motor behavior. My goal is to help the student athlete identify barriers to teamwork and enhance sports performance by improving mental skills for success. Do you have any doubts about your sport before or during competition? Do you get so anxious that you don't have a calm mind or think straight in competition? Become easily frustrated when things do not go according to plan? So when you consider these questions, the next obvious question is this: when is my sports mastery program needed? You don't perform well when others are watching you. The sports mastery program is needed when you maintain doubt about your sport before or during games. You feel anxious or scared when you perform in competition. So how can the student athlete benefit from the sports mastery coaching program? They will have improved focus and the ability to concentrate and manage distractions, develop systems and strategies to increase confidence and eliminate doubts and fears, develop coping skills to deal with setbacks and errors, find the right zone of intensity for their sport. The student athlete will also learn to develop and enhance communication skills. The student athlete will benefit by learning to develop a healthy belief system and identify irrational thoughts. The student athlete would also benefit when they learn to improve and balance motivation for optimal performance, develop confidence post-injury. The student athlete will benefit from my sports mastery program by learning to identify and enter the zone more often. At the end of the day, my sports mastery program does not apply to a wide variety of athletes. This program is for the serious athletes only. Most of my student athletes are in junior high, high school, and college. However, they are highly committed to excellence in seeing how far they can go in their sports. My sports mastery program is not something they need, it's something that they want. These student athletes love competition and testing themselves against the best in their sport. They understand the importance of positive attitude and mental toughness. These student athletes want every possible advantage they can get, including the mental edge over competition. The first thing we do is identify the student athlete's hopes and dreams, pains and fears, and barriers and limitations. This serves as a guideline and helps the student athlete to think about mindset. When we first meet in person or virtually, I ask more questions about mindset and beliefs based on assessment results, so we can develop a complete picture of your mental game. Once the game plan is developed, we will begin our work on mental skills that apply to your current and specific challenges. I present a sports mastery program that is customized to the athlete's individual needs, I always include the core foundation mental skills for all of my athletes. We apply the sports mastery concepts and skills to practice, pre-performance preparation, warm-up routines, and post-performance assessments. The next step is to decide if my sports mastery program is something you want. Not everyone wants to take the time to learn about mindset and how it affects an individual's sports performance. I can tell you by participating in my sports mastery program, you'll set yourself apart from other student athletes. I help the student athlete transform, shake their limiting beliefs, silence monkey mind chatter, and equip them with the tools to succeed. Sports mastery will provide you with the tools to maximize your game in competition and in the classroom. To learn more, visit sportsmastery.com/coaching.